with the same rights as people in Britain. But now, Parliament imposes this new tax without their consent. The colonists feel betrayed. British policy increasingly frustrates George Washington. It is an obstacle on his path towards prosperity as a planter and land speculator. In the fall of 1770, Washington visits his land surveyor, who has lined up some choice parcels in the Ohio country. His journey takes him back to the places where he had once fought for the British Empire. Near the forks of the Ohio, where he had barely survived the first real battle of the war at Fort Necessity. As a reward for their service in the French and Indian War, colonial soldiers were promised land. Washington is here today to reap his reward. But because the Royal Proclamation of 1763 preserves the West for the Indians, he knows he can't take possession. Yet. Like many people, he believes it won't be long before he can. On his trip, Washington dines at Fort Pitt.
I saw some exceeding fine land. There is an opening prospect in the back country for adventurers, where an enterprising man with very little money may lay the foundation of a noble estate in new settlements for himself and posterity.
And what of the proclamation line? Are we not to protect the Indian lands? Surely we must give the Indians something if we are to keep the peace.
I can never look upon that proclamation in any other light but as a temporary expedient to quiet the minds of the Indians. It must fall, surely, in a few years.
The Crown itself has not yet consented.
Consent or no, they're settling it as fast as a wildfire. Last year, I'm sure there were between 4,000 and 5,000. And all this spring and summer, the roads are lined with wagons, all moving to the Ohio.
Any person who neglects the opportunity of hunting out good lands and, in some measure, marking and distinguishing them as their own will never regain the opportunity.
It was 20 years before that Washington had first been dispatched to secure this territory for the British Empire. His guide on that journey was the Seneca chief Gayasuta. It's ironic that they would meet again now as Washington seeks to acquire the land for himself. Like so many Indians, Gayasuta was used to a world where two empires could be played off each other. Nevertheless, the Seneca chief seems pleased to see Washington again.
In the person of Gayasuta, I found an old acquaintance, he being one of the Indians that went with me to the French in 1753. He expressed satisfaction in seeing me and greeted us with great kindness. He thanked me for saying that peace and friendship was the wish of my people, and again expressed his people's desire and their friendly disposition to the white people.
Despite their friendliness, Gayasuta knows that Washington is not here merely to pay a social call, but to acquire land. It is only British policy that's holding Washington back, just as British policies are angering colonists elsewhere. In New England, a clash of expectations leads to mounting tension. British rule is seen as heavy-handed. A riot ends when redcoats kill 5 in what colonists call the Boston Massacre. They see Britain as riding roughshod over the rights of colonial assemblies. Radicals increasingly assert the right of self-rule. In December 1773, things come to a head over yet another tax, this time on tea. Britain's reaction to the Boston Tea Party is severe. The Crown floods Boston with troops and rewrites the colony's charter. Even moderates like Washington find these developments disturbing. When he and his colleagues express solidarity with Boston, the royal governor dissolves Virginia's legislature. They reconvene at the nearby Raleigh Tavern.
For my part, I shall not undertake to say where the line between Great Britain and the colonies should be drawn, but I am clearly of the opinion that one ought to be drawn, and our rights clearly ascertained. I could wish, I own, that this dispute had been left to posterity to determine, but the crisis is upon us, and our rights must be asserted.
And yet, even at this moment of crisis, colonists like Washington have no interest in breaking away from the empire. Their concerns amount to a family argument, not a call to revolution. This portrait shows Washington wearing a gorget, the mark of a British officer. It affirms his allegiance to the crown. In September 1774, at the First Continental Congress, Washington and other colonial representatives call for a coordinated effort to resist British actions. Relations with Britain continue to deteriorate, and Washington is drawn further into the fray. A stream of admirers come to Mount Vernon to seek his political and military counsel. Americans prepare to defend what they see as their rights, by force of arms if necessary. In April 1775, fighting erupts in Massachusetts between colonial and British forces. This is no longer a family feud, a dispute between loyal members of the empire. Once blood has been shed, there's no going back. With Boston under siege, a second Continental Congress is convened. Washington no longer aspires to be a British gentleman. He used to order his suits cut to the latest styles in London. To this Congress, he wears the uniform he designed for Virginia's new militia. It has been 20 years since the young, naive colonel set off into the backcountry to join a battle sparking an epic struggle. Now he anticipates a new battle. The Second Continental Congress must organize a war and decide who will lead it.
Washington, welcome.
Some take Washington's uniform as a statement that he is prepared to lead the colonial forces. John Adams